Hello, and welcome to the Catching the Octopus podcast. Here, we will explore how connecting inward gives us an advantage outward. We openly talk about the obstacles and challenges and difficulties that life throws our way and how they become moments of gratitude and things that can benefit us when we look back on our lives. I'm your host, Naomi Hurley, and it is my mission to bring you top quality guests that will share with you openly their obstacles and also the techniques they use to go inward that strengthens the way that they serve themselves and others at the highest level. Thank you for joining. Let's get started. Thank you for joining us in this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. And today we're going to have a chat with Saurabh Jain. Now, he's a seasoned leader in technology and healthcare, and he's currently serving as the CEO of Opyl, which is a publicly listed company at the forefront of AI-assisted technologies for the healthcare sector. And I'm really excited to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. Today we have with us Saurabh Jain, who is a... So could you give our listeners a little bit more of a background about you and about Opyl, just so they can get to know you a bit better?
Yeah, totally. So probably the three main parts of my life that I always talk about. What I'm doing right now, I'm an interim CEO for a medtech business, publicly listed company, doing some really exciting stuff I'll tell you guys about. I'm on about half a dozen company boards, or I end up kind of becoming like the mentor for the CEO and just kind of help them go through whatever problems they're facing in life. And then the last third of my life, I'm a meditator. Like that's my thing. I probably spend more hours doing that than I do almost anything else in my day. So they're the three main parts of my world.
Yeah, awesome. So I serve on a couple of, not a whole heap, but a couple of boards in that sort of position. And I just love the ability to give back without it being too restrictive, right? Because you're not in that one company having to serve. It's just you show up, you do your thing and you move off, right?
Oh, totally. Look, I reckon the whole idea about working in one organization, it's actually a bit of a scam. So I used to be a CEO of a tech business, $100 million business, finished up there 2.5 years ago.
Yep.
And that's when I started the board role. And I've learned more, I reckon, in like the last 2 years than the prior 10. Because what it is, and I think you touched on it, because I work in like 6, 7 different companies. You see different machinations, you see different growth challenges, cash challenges, customer challenges, people challenges. And you get to kind of watch 7 movies at once. So I love the giving back, but I reckon I actually get like so much more out of it than the guys that I work with.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's what prompted me to go into Get Up and Grow and do what I do now is, I was in the same business for about 6 years and felt like I really served and gave a lot of value, but it was just those people that I interacted with. Whereas now it's just so much more expansive. And like you said, I connect with people, I learn from them, I share with them, I give value to them, and it's really rewarding.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'm sure you found as well is you actually learn a different skill set. So my skill set is now less about how to be a CEO of a medtech business, which I'm doing now, and I hope I'm doing well. But it's more about like how do businesses run? Like what are the common machinations between different organizations? In some cases, I found the melody is actually super similar. And then you actually have like a high level of I might call it high level of competence, but a different level of competence that you can only experience when you work in multiple organizations. And then when I am an interim CEO, so this is my second time I've done this, did this a year ago in a medtech business selling smartwatches for kids. I was so much better than 2 years earlier when I was like a CEO stuck in one organization for 5 years.
Yeah.
Because you've just experienced more of the world.
Yeah, most definitely. And I love that, you're working in a space now that have this AI assisted technologies, because that's where we're all going, right? Like we're starting to, and I've even seen that they've got AI psychologists, right? So I'm not really endorsing because I love working with people in that space, but this is where we're going. So how is that presenting in these technologies that you're working with?
Yes, I mean, so what the company does, Trolkey, from an AI perspective, like it's properly scary. So what the guys have done, I mean, it took 3 years and $25 million, is they got about 65,000 medical trials. They picked up about 400 variables off each trial. We've just upped it about 700 variables off each trial, like things like the dosage, the compound, who's sponsoring it, where the sites are, like all the variables that we thought would lead to an outcome or could influence an outcome.
Yep.
put that all into a machine learning algorithm, and now we can actually predict whether a clinical trial will succeed or not with about 90% accuracy.
Wow.
Um, and you can do that before the trial even starts. So
That's amazing.
it's one of those kind of strange things. Like 2 years ago, this was not a solvable problem. So when the guys first started, yeah, there's actually not a way to do this.
Mm,
But that's what AI has done, is sort of solve problems that were completely unsolvable. And the nuance thing there, I think, is like a single person can't know all these medical journals and all these medical trials, but AI totally can. In like,
mm.
a couple of days, will crunch through all those numbers and give you insight to something that you otherwise would not have known about.
And that
And
helps you plan your resources a lot better, especially financial resources, doesn't it? So you're actually putting it into things that are going to get outcomes rather than just spending it on these trials that aren't going to be successful.
oh, totally. It's going to make the whole clinical trial process where the trials with the best design, with the best molecules, with the best dosage, with the best sponsors, they're the ones that will get the funding. And you're going
Mm,
to find the trials that were actually probably always going to fail. They'll probably get funding pulled from them.
mm.
And it will become a bit of a Darwinian circumstance where people will just put money into the right spot. It's something that people kind of do implicitly off their gut, but now it can be like a super database, a data-driven decision.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And look, we all have that space of, oh, if we're clever, we all use that internal gut instinct when we're making decisions.
Mm,
Might not be the only thing we tap into, but it's nice to have that helping hand as well that goes, your gut instinct is probably on the money because theoretically or
yeah.
statistically it's supported as well.
Oh, totally. And then you can get a lot more data to inform that gut or to inform that kind of the subconscious mind that you're kind of working with. So you'll see,
Mm,
who are all your competitor trials? When do we think they're going to announce their results? Which ones do we reckon are going to fail? Which ones do we reckon are going to succeed? Like, how are you placed in like a time scale compared to everybody else in the world?
mm,
Um, Again, like this data was just not available like a couple of months ago. So we only just launched the product like 2 months ago. So we're still pre-revenue, so we're still trying to get our first set of customers.
yep.
But the response has been amazing. I mean, the response firstly initially is like disbelief, like it actually can't be real, right?
Yeah.
And like a year ago, ChatGPT, I thought that was impossible, and in my lifetime that would not be solved, but that totally did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're having the same reaction for people that we're talking to now. First reaction doesn't make sense. You can't predict this stuff without accuracy before it starts. But then after they run a few trials through the simulator, they're like, oh wow, this stuff's actually kind of cool. And it kind of helps them tweak all their variables to maximize their chance of success. Well,
Mm.
from a financial perspective, it helps them just kind of reallocate some of their capital resources.
Yeah, so that's probably something I didn't tap on. I was kind of like, oh, it saves you from actually going down the path that you don't need to, but it also gives you the ability to pivot and adjust and make the
Mm.
modifications you need to make as well, doesn't it?
Totally. I mean, and it does that at quite a large scale as well. So, one use case we've thought about is whether this makes sense for the investment community. So people investing in pharmaceutical stocks.
Mm,
So me and the CTO right now, we're just doing it like on the side. Like we'll see a stock. Demerits was the last one we did. We thought, awesome, they're going to announce mid-March. They got a 75% chance of success. That's super high for like a rare kidney disease. So we invested some of our own dollars and we're up. Like we're up 60% for the month.
yep.
But I reckon once this data is available to a wider audience, a lot more people will use this to invest in trials. So
Mm,
you'll find the pharmaceutical companies that actually are doing like really, really good work and solving like a really hard problem, but are likely to solve it. They'll be the guys that share price will go up and they'll find it easier to raise capital.
yeah.
And it will be hopefully be a bit of a virtuous cycle where the good guys will actually get more money to do more good stuff.
Yep. And do you think it might diversify the investors as well and the demographic of that? Because I know that some people that look at pharma kind of feel like the investors may influence the decision, although there's rigorous
Mm.
tests to make sure it doesn't. But if there's more a diverse range of investors, then that's going to take out the possibility of that as well, isn't it? Because there's not going to be someone with an invested interest.
Yeah, I mean, there's always someone with a vested interest. It just
Yeah.
depends
Okay.
how much pull they have over the CEO and the board and those kind of things. Because every investor wants the drug to succeed, but the clinical trial process it's actually kind of pretty good. So
Yeah.
even if you want to push it through and it's not real, like it just doesn't get through.
Yeah.
But what it does do though is it lets people that would otherwise invest on a guess or a hunch, like
Mm.
invest with a bit more confidence. So hopefully over time you'll get more people investing in pharma.
Yeah.
In the same way that like you get a lot of data for like, the FANG stocks, Netflix, Facebook, all those kind of guys that actually help you make a good investment decision.
Yep.
It'll be the same, but it'll be on the pharmaceutical side.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So it's a
Hmm,
bit of a more safer investment than what it's been in the past.
totally, totally.
Yeah, which is really great
Yeah.
when you're looking at trying to multiply your money and grow it, you want it to be in the safest space possible, right?
Oh, totally right. And the thing with pharmaceuticals, it's a bit of a binary outcome when it comes to really small pharmas with only one or two drugs. They're
Mm,
either going to succeed or fail.
mm.
And if you kind of know with 90% confidence, like hopefully in the long arc of time, you'll do really, really well out of that. And then the farmers that are looking for funding will hopefully do really well out of that as well.
Yeah, yeah. So tell us a little bit more about Opal. You said that this
Hmm.
technology is now being launched a couple of months ago, but
Yeah.
what else is going on in the world of Opal?
Yeah, so we had another division that did clinical trial recruitment. So we just announced to the market that we're actually divesting that. So we're selling that off, just to kind of free up a bit of mind space, a bit of resources. Because I'm like a super boring CEO. I think there's something to be said about focus. Like just do one thing and do it really well. Don't do two things and do them crappy.
Yeah.
So we're just doing this one thing. We're going to do it really well. But there's a lot more to do. So like 2 months ago, we were at 88%. 6 months ago, we were at 85%. So right now we're upping it from 65,000 trials to 400,000 trials.
Wow.
So they'll do like all the devices, all the vitamins, all the alternative therapies as well. We're adding in a lot of granular detail around compounds and molecule, probably about a month away.
Hmm.
So then hopefully then when you're running a drug trial, you can actually see like who are my competitors and what compounds and molecules are they using versus what I'm using.
Hmm.
What are their dosage frequencies? Are they doing injections or creams or inhalers or all those kind of things as well?
Mm.
Um, because what I think will eventually happen, we haven't built it yet, but it's on our list in the next couple of months, is we'll actually build like a really good clinical trial simulator.
Yep.
Um, so right now there's about 35,000 trials in the world that happen every year. I reckon what will happen, so 35,000 trials that happen in humans every year. I
Yes.
reckon what will happen is that number will drop to like 10,000 and there'll be millions of virtual trials. Well, people will
Yeah.
actually run it through a simulator. We'll run it a million times. We'll tell them the outcome, probabilistically based, and then they'll pick the top 10, and that's what they'll do in humans.
Yep.
But because humanity is doing less trials, it hopefully means you can overfund them. So you
Mm.
just have more participants, you can have more sites, you can have more rigor about it. You can actually really, really zone in on the investment.
Mm. And do you think it
Hmm.
will, at the moment we do test on humans, but we always also test on other animals as well when we're not
Yeah.
as sure about what's going to happen, if there's going to be those side
Mhm.
effects, etc. But this simulator will actually reduce the need for that a lot as well, because we will kind of have a bit more confidence in what we're doing the testing with, won't we?
I think so. So we only do kind of phase two and phase three. So phase zero and phase one. Phase zero is more animals. Phase one is more like just on the safety perspective.
Right.
So we haven't actually thought about going down that kind of food chain, but it kind of conceptually makes sense. So I think once we solve this problem, we'll hopefully kind of move down that way as well.
Yeah. No stopping you, right? Once you go to one stop, then there's the next place to go.
Oh, totally. It's
Yeah.
inevitable.
Yeah.
It'll just take time for us to kind of solve this.
Yeah, yeah. So what is one of the things you love about being in leadership? I mean, you're moving from CEO roles, which are
Hmm.
usually quite stressful. And I
Yeah.
suppose in that role, it's less about managing and supervising and leading the operations and more about that strategic direction, isn't it, from that seat?
Yeah, so look, I think that's always interesting, but I think a lot of CEOs that say they love strategy and all that kind of stuff, but that's what you do like on Monday from 9 o'clock to 9:30.
Yeah,
Um, and then you have like 39 and a half hours in the week to do everything else. For me, it's more the execution.
yeah.
Like, how do I get what's in my mind and my personality and my vision for the organization and totally imprint this in an
Mm,
organization?
yeah,
And how do I do that in some sort of way that's sustainable after me? Because I'm only interim, right? I'll be here. I've been here 4 months. The plan is about six. So next month we're going to start looking for CEOs. If you know anyone good in the medtech space, please tell me. So then I've got to figure out like how do I totally make sure whatever I do sustains past me. So hopefully I'll join the board and I'll still be around. But how do I make sure that nothing kind of gets lost?
yeah.
So that's what I quite enjoy. The other part as well is like being on a board. You can get quite distant from reality.
Mm,
Like it's easy to sit in an ivory tower and throw rocks about, why isn't growth happening? Why is cash down? Why are we having this staff churn? But it's good like once every 18 months to be in the trenches for 3 to 6 months and realize, damn, this shit is actually hard.
yeah.
Um, and it's much more complex and just things are harder than they seem. And it just kind of brushes up my skills as well.
Yeah.
Um, then the last part about why I like these interim CEO gigs is the thing with managing teams and all that kind of stuff. It's not a fully formed science. Like we're still figuring out how do you get a whole bunch of people to work together where it's not a master slave relationship with low unemployment. You can't do master slave anymore. Like that stopped 20 or 30 years ago. People have choice. They get up and leave and they want internalization and all that kind of lovely stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm still actually learning. I think people are still learning, and management consultants are learning actually how this works.
Mm.
So I did my first master in MBA probably 18, 19 years ago. I did my second master of business tech probably 10 years ago.
Yep.
I've got a younger brother, much younger, who's going through his MBA.
Yeah.
And I reckon like 80% of the stuff that I learned is actually just wrong now. Because just the body of knowledge moves so quickly. So you just got to stay at the coal face, see it, experience it. The simple example, like the way that we're selling Opal to pharmaceutical companies, clinical research organizations, and investors, is the exact same way at my previous interim CEO gig. We sold watches to kids. It's totally transposable, but that actual method of doing online engagement and having
Yeah.
influencers and doing events like this, just that was not a thing 2 years ago.
No, no, you're right.
Um, so it helps me kind of keep it real in that sense.
Yeah, and I love how you're saying, how we haven't got it all together, and I think that's because of this changing world we're in, right? And I see some leaders that'll actually kind of, I've been doing this for 10 years, whatever, and they don't think they need to learn and grow, but they're the ones that are actually having a harder time because they're not adapting to the environment around them, in my opinion. So it's more
Mm.
these people that are open to say, I don't have all the answers, but I'm going to try my best. And they're a bit more open-minded to have these different influences, modeling, and learnings coming to give them a hand.
I totally agree. So one of the things that I'm very cognizant about is like, how do I pick like a great CEO to take over?
Yeah.
Um, so that's a big thing. What I do is CEO recruitment, right? Because I'm on one of these boards every 3 to 5 years. So someone churns through. Either we lose them to a better job they got, or we didn't like them and they leave. And I reckon the number one quality is someone who's coachable.
Yeah.
Because then they'll accept, oh shit, maybe I actually don't know all this. I'm happy to have a chat about it. But someone who's super confident, knows the right answer, knows they're right before they start talking, they actually won't take a moment to learn from somebody else.
Mm,
And they won't do well in the long arc of time. They'll do well in a short period, or they might get lucky, or they might have done really well 10 years ago, and they'll find it really hard to replicate that success now.
mm.
So I totally agree.
Well, I actually find because I deal with lots of different people in the individual services I do, as well as the corporate element. And I
Hmm.
actually find that element is bang on. And it's that coachability that actually leads to all of the good stuff like emotional intelligence, because they're happy to reflect,
Yeah.
right, and take
Hmm.
feedback. And, even just general intelligence, I think it actually expands the
Yeah.
way people think. And I think that is a
Totally.
definite key element when looking for, replacing your role.
Yeah, totally. And it's one of those things that are very hard to find. At least I find during the interview process, because we're
Mm,
somehow trained to be like super confident. I know all the right answers, and it takes a little while just to dig under the surface to be like, well, will this guy or gal be okay to admit they failed at something?
yeah.
And will they be okay to say, no, I didn't do that, but I'll do this next time? Or I actually just don't know. Like, what do you reckon?
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of interaction, a lot of trust between two people to kind of have that, kind of deep, vulnerable conversation.
Mm,
Um, and as an interviewee, we're trained to actually not show that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, we come in as an interviewee, we try and come in and have this perfect model that we're showcasing, right? Because we want to show
Mm.
the best instead of realizing that sometimes that authenticity is what people are looking for.
Oh, totally, totally, totally. So, yeah, so I'll start that in the next month or so. So we'll start hunting around for the right CEO, and we'll have a bit of a transition period, and hopefully, fingers crossed, I get a good one. I think it's one of those markets where I think this company will do really well. I mean, the market cap is like 4 mil, like
Yeah.
it's because we haven't gone into revenue. So I think it'll do quite well, and it's doing something quite unique. And there's not many people that are doing this kind of thing because this was not a solvable problem a couple of years ago.
Mm,
If you're enjoying this podcast and you want Naomi or any of her guests featured on your podcast or as a keynote speaker at your next event, you'll find their contact details included in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more about how you can work with Naomi individually or as part of your strategy to improve leadership in your business, Then review the courses, offers, and services at getupandgoconsulting.com.au.
Yeah, and I think there's still a bit of an apprehension about AI as well, just purely because it's being misunderstood. Like I'm doing a master's of business psychology at the moment. I've only got a unit and a half to go. Yay!
Well
And
done.
then
Yeah.
then I'm thinking of doing a PhD. So then I'm probably going to be tying myself up for ages.
You've been there
But
forever. Yep.
yeah, but one of the things that is really time consuming whenever doing assignments and that sort of stuff is doing the research on articles and, having AI there to go, hey, AI, can you find me the top 10 articles on this topic that are peer reviewed and that are in with this date range?
Yeah.
Just reduces the search. Then
Totally.
I've only got to read 20 articles rather than 100, right, to find the right ones.
Yeah. And I think people that are apprehensive about AI, it doesn't come from a place of like knowledge.
Mm,
Like they actually haven't done the work, they haven't thought about it, haven't kind of deeply understood like how is it actually going to affect the world.
mm.
Like the common things like you'll see on the news every day, it's like, oh my God, we're all going to lose our jobs, the robot's going to take over. So we had the exact same problem, like 250 years ago when we first had the looms, and you've heard about the
Yeah.
Luddites, have you?
No, yeah, and when the
And people,
Industrial Revolution came in, I was going
yeah,
to say the same thing. Yeah,
totally.
we've been there before.
And now it just means that I don't own two shirts, I own 1,000 shirts, right? Like we
Yeah,
just own more stuff, we just do more things, but we all still work crazy hours, right? Because there's still stuff, and we'll consume more.
yeah.
Um, so I think it's just going to be one of those kind of things. Like electricity was fantastic, improved our world, and it's integrated everything that we do. It'll just be another one of those kind of really core foundational things that we take for granted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the thing as well, as we're saying before, that ability to adapt and pivot and just communicate with the environment. I mean, that's what the whole idea of catching the octopus is about, right? The octopus is really
Mm,
good at looking at the environment and adapting and not just using one brain, but multiple brains to make educated choices with. And I think that's going to
mm,
be a sign of the times of going, okay, this particular job or occupation doesn't serve me anymore. Okay, this is an
mhm.
opportunity. What else do I get to do
Yep.
and learn now?
Oh, totally. And I think what it is just in that is the ability to make a decision based on incomplete information,
Mm,
which I think paralyzes like a lot of people.
yeah,
Because like when you're making like a radical change, like you actually don't totally know definitively whether you're doing the right thing. So I chose to divest the other division, was making revenue, doing really, really well. I think that was the right decision because we're going to double down on a better product. But I can't be definitively sure. But making a decision is better than not making a decision and just going with inertia and just going down the stream as the rest of the world does.
yeah, yeah. And in some cases as well, then feeling that victimization around that of not being able to be where you want to be, but people aren't taking the steps to follow that. And I think that was quite evident through COVID. And it was very unfortunate that so many people did lose businesses. But the businesses
Mm.
that succeeded were the ones that pivoted, right? Like they were the ones that found a
Hmm.
different way to do things.
It is a purely Darwinian event. Where just the fittest survive, right? The guys that could pivot, went to home delivery, that did whatever it is they did, or went from bricks and mortar to retail shops, like even like our local pizza restaurant. They started selling their pasta sauces in little tins, and so even some of their raw ingredients. I'm like, that's super clever.
Yeah.
But they're the ones that actually survived, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know my beautician, she actually sold kits so that you could do your own eyebrows at home, right? So because you couldn't actually go
Oh, brilliant.
to a beautician. So for people that like to have nice,
Yeah.
I wouldn't say manicured, but yeah, manicured eyebrows, there was a solution there, and so people still bought it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that happens more often and quicker now than it probably did a decade ago.
Mm,
So you need to just iterate much, much faster. Like for example, in the software world now, we'll have like a new version of our software every single week. We're pushing out updates. But like
yeah.
5 years ago, you do once a year. 15 years ago, it was like once every 5 years. So just the rate of change is actually increasing, and
Mm,
that's probably why people sometimes struggle with changing so quickly, right?
yeah.
And I don't think that's an age thing. I found some older people that are really good at it. I found some young people that are not good at it. It's just a person thing.
Yeah. And I think an exposure thing as well. Like once, like you
Mm.
were saying before, there's this, because I believe one of the biggest fears, and maybe I'd be pushing it to say maybe the only fear, is the fear of the unknown.
Mm.
So even if we have a phobia of spiders, is it going to bite me? What's going to happen to me? Right. And you can break it
Yeah.
down to that. So when something is unknown, you've got your risk takers that are just like, man, don't care. And then you've got other people that are
Yeah.
kind of like, oh, is my payoff going to be worth it? Right.
Mm.
And so that's not age relevant. That's not generation relevant. That's like human relevant.
And I think that's taught. So my wife and I have got two lovely twins, about 2.5 years old. So we're teaching them animals and those kind of things. And my wife was showing them like a little card of a spider. They're like, yeah, a spider. And she was made like a really afraid kind of face. Like, oh, it's a spider, be afraid. And I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, we should probably not do that. You should be like, hey, that's a spider, and not teach fear into kids. But we're taught to fear so many things in our lives.
Mm,
Um, and we just think it's socially okay to be afraid of stuff, right? And to be paralyzed by things.
mm,
When in reality, like, I don't know, in Australia, you might get a dozen people a year that get bitten by spiders, one or two a year probably die.
yeah.
But 25 million people are petrified of them.
Yeah. I know, right? And I think now these days with all of the medical support that you have, even with snake
Mm,
bites, the amount of people that get bitten by snakes, very rarely does someone die from it, but we're in the same space, right? And then you've got these phobias
mm.
of other little things. Like my daughter said the other day she was scared of clowns. And I'm like, you're not scared of clowns. And then I saw her watching a YouTube video of Rebecca Zamolo. She loves Rebecca
Mm.
Zamolo. And they had this, my
Yep.
biggest fear is clowns. And I'm like, oh, like you said, she's learned that from them, that's something
Yeah.
weird.
Mm. And then often what happens, that gets buried somewhere deep in the subconscious.
Yes.
And then unless you pull it out, like it unfortunately ends up sticking.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, well, we unpacked it because, yeah, I
Mm.
don't like things sticky in the subconscious. I see too many people that are trying to deal with that now in adult.
Oh, totally.
We try and look, I was saying to someone today actually that I was seeing in a therapy space,
Mm.
she was worried about her parenting. And I said, doesn't matter how good you are, there's going to be something that you do wrong, right? That's
You're
just
gonna screw something up. Like
gotta
everyone's a bit screwed up.
exactly. So maybe I don't get the clown fear out. I don't know. I'll try my best though,
Yeah.
right?
Look, you'll either love your kids too much, you won't love them enough, or you won't get it right. Yeah, totally.
Yeah,
Everyone's going to screw something up with their kids.
it's about being human. Um,
Yeah,
so
totally.
I've
Hmm.
got three questions that I ask all of my guests,
Hmm.
and you mentioned you've
Yeah.
watched some episodes, so you're kind of across these. So let's get stuck into them.
Yeah.
First, what is the biggest obstacle you've had to overcome, and how did that strengthen your connection inward?
It was probably like when I kind of decided to drop out of like the real world of working full time.
Yeah.
So so I finished up as the CEO of like a real big public company 2.5 years ago. Tim and I had a falling out, happened over Christmas. My wife and I would just had our twins, so they were like 2.5 months old. And I
Yep.
was traveling 2 weeks a month, like most dads do when they work super hard trying to provide. And just being forced to be at home
Mm,
was like the best thing ever. And I was like, oh wow, I can actually choose to not work full time. Look, we're not wealthy, we don't spend a lot, and we just kind of cut our expenses down and lived a super simple life.
yeah.
Um, and that kind of allowed me to kind of get a lot deeper into the meditation part of my life. So I've done my 10,000 hours. I'll do 1,500 hours per year of the meditation, and that's kind of what helped me deeper understand myself from an internal perspective.
Yeah.
Um, and you can only kind of do that if you have the time to do it.
Yeah, totally agree. And that shift from being always busy to not being stimulated, although it's once you actually move into it and you're like, yes, this is great. It's a bit tricky in the transition, isn't it? Because you're kind of like, oh, there's something missing. What am I? I can't have time to
Mm.
relax. Like it feels a bit foreign, doesn't it, in the early days?
Totally. Because well, what it is for a lot of CEOs, a big sense of purpose and identity is that people need to talk to them. And
Mm,
you'll have like a full day, you go back from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you actually think that is good, but that's actually really bad. Because great things don't happen when you're busy.
yeah.
So being able to actually have a couple hours a day free, not really doing something, maybe chipping away at something, like not being completely enthralled in a complex task, it is priceless.
Yeah.
Um, and it takes a while to kind of make that transition, but once you have, and you get thrown back into the busy world, like I am now, you do whatever you can to not make it all encompassing. So for me, the way I've done, I've got like 3 EAs. There's so much of like the actual churn work that I do, I kind of get through them and they kind of chip away at a lot of the actual tasks for me.
Yeah.
So I can still kind of keep a bit of free time every day to think about the more complex things that I'm trying to solve.
And going into that space of creativity, right? Because that's more of a flow. And so when we're in that actionable state, we're always thinking about creating actions. That's a total different energy association, right? But when we're in that time and space where there's silence, that's when all the little real great gold nugget ideas pop in, isn't it?
Oh, totally. Because what you'll find in the mind, or the way I've seen it work, is all those ideas are always bubbling up to the surface. But when you're busy and the mind is talking, you just can't hear it.
Yeah.
So when the mind is silent and I don't know, you're going for a walk or you're just reading a book and it's not kind of chatting to you nonstop, that's when those ideas bubble back up again. You can actually catch them, and
Yeah.
you can be like, oh wow, that's what I meant. That's why we say that we get like shower idea, right?
Yeah.
Because you're in the shower, there's a bit of noise in the background. So when there's noise in the background, the mind tends to talk less. At least that's what I found.
Yes.
So when it talks less, that's when the subconscious is just churning through some complex problem, and it kind of comes back with some sort of answer for you.
Mm. Yeah, I'm a big shower idea person myself as well. I need to get some sort of way, some waterproof pad so I can write it down because then I start to over concentrate to remember all my ideas. Um, so what another question for you. What has been a major challenge experienced in your life? And I believe that even our biggest challenges can be beneficial for us. So I'm looking for
Mm.
something that you can look back on now and go, there's some gratitude for that.
Oh, to look like one of the things I've noticed in my experience is like we all suffer in life.
Yeah.
Like just shit things happen, right?
Yeah.
So my wife and I, very unfortunately, like we lost our boy probably 5 or 6 years ago. Horrible, horrendous. We struggled with it for a very long time. Struggled as a couple.
Yeah.
Um, and you kind of think like, why did God let God do that to me? Does he even exist? She exists? I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not totally convinced one way or another right now.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need those kind of events just to shake you out of the mold,
Hmm.
just to be like, why am I doing what I'm doing, right? Like, what is actually super important to me in life? And that's when I kind of double down on the meditation side of things.
Yeah.
Um, so I was like, well, life is actually so finite. Like, you
Mm.
actually don't know when it's going to end. Um, I- my wife had a cousin over from India the other day, and we caught up, and they at my in-laws' place. We'd catch up every afternoon, and it's like, oh my God, sorry, like you've got so much energy. You've worked a full day. You're playing with the kids. Like, what's going on? Like when you realize how short your life is,
Yeah.
like you'll always be energized.
Yeah.
You're like, I'm so lucky to have another life, another day. I'm fit. I can walk around. I can do a lot.
Yeah.
So just to feel that mortality, I think that's what I'm quite grateful for.
Mm. Yeah. I love that because, and I'm sorry to hear that you did lose your child because I
Hmm.
could never imagine the pain that you would go through for that.
Nothing worse in the world. Nothing
Oh,
worse in the world. Yeah.
but that element of, okay, it's gifted me this new lease on life, or it's gifted me the ability
Mm.
to touch more lives because of the way that I focus, then at least gives
Yeah.
some sort of meaning.
Yeah. Totally. Totally. No,
Yeah.
very much so. Yeah.
And I probably already know your answer from some of your comments already, but what daily, weekly, or monthly practices do you do that strengthen your connection with your inner self?
Oh, look, I think what it is, and by the way, whenever anyone says they care about their inner self, check out their calendar, check out how they spend their time,
Yeah, I love it.
to see if they can actually evidence it. So for me, like, I'll do about 100 days per year of meditation. I'll go
Yep.
off 45 days, no talking, no reading, no writing, off the grid, and I'll go meditate. I'll do 2 hours every day. So
Yep.
an hour in the morning, hour of night. I try to do a bit more on the weekend if I kind of get some time.
Yep.
It's just kind of spending that time for myself, just to figure out if in this life I can actually get really good at it.
Yeah.
It is like so hard. It is like the
Yeah.
hardest thing ever.
Yeah.
But just nonstop, constantly investing that time just to make sure that I can kind of do that.
Mm,
Because I don't think enough people sit in silence for an hour at a time, or a minute at a time, or 10 seconds at a time.
no.
Like we're just taught to constantly engage, look at a phone, look at a notification, reply to an email. And I think to be able to sit in quietness and kind of have that concentration, that's a real superpower these days.
Yeah. Yeah, no, most definitely. And that silence is where the gold is because when we're sitting in silence and when we can learn to be in a state where we are in control of our mind, body, and emotions, because that's
Mm,
all we really can control in life, right? Is those three things. You can't control anything else, even though there's an illusion of it. And that silence is a time where you actually get to sit in that and go, okay, the soul, the spirit, universe, whatever anyone believes in,
yeah.
actually I've got a grip of this. Like I've got a
Mm,
hold of what's going on in my life.
Totally. So I had this experience in that last meditation course I did about 20 days in, like the mind was just completely silent for hour after hour.
Wow.
And like ever since normally the mind talks to you nonstop.
Yeah.
Like ever since I've actually lost that voice. I don't have that mind that talks to me anymore.
Oh, wow.
And
That's great.
there's an extreme amount of pleasure and satisfaction and ability to focus or unify the mind on like a single task,
Mm,
um, which you can only get if you do the work. There
yeah.
is no, unfortunately, there is no shortcut. But that's it's like the ability to control one's thoughts. It is so impactful.
Yeah.
And then when you control the thoughts, the next step is to control the emotions because the thoughts are held in one part of the mind, the emotions actually held in a different part of the mind.
Yeah.
And then once you have your thoughts mastered, then you can go to the emotions, and one by one, you kind of you knock them over.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you behave
Um,
differently, right? Because you're not being triggered and reacted as much or as deeply,
mm,
I should say. We're still triggered and reacted from time to time because we're human, but it's
mm,
not as deep as it comes through, in my
yeah,
opinion.
I'd use a different term rather than you behave differently. It's you actually slowly become a different person.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
So one thing my wife said, so last 45-day course I went on to, so my wife, she's like a single mum for 45 days, which is like super lovely. She's fantastic.
yeah.
So she visited me to India where I went and traveled for a bit, did a week in Disneyland with the kids in Japan on the way back. And so what I always do, second time I've done it, I'll ask her like on the last day, like, was it worth it? Was it worth her being a single mum, taking care of the twins, yet working 2 days a week for, that 7, 8 week period?
Yeah.
And she said yes, like she's seen the deep change in me
Mm,
that I'm just a different person than I was like 2 months ago.
yeah.
So I think if you do the right things and you kind of mold the mind the way that you want to mold it, you do actually become a different person. It
Yeah.
just takes a bit of time, or you can go super intensive and try to get done a bit quicker, which is super hard to do. But if you've got the energy and you've suffered enough that you want to,
Yeah.
you would totally find a way to do it.
Yeah. And I loved what you mentioned before as well, that it is a practice and it's something we've got to work on. And I've been meditating every day now for about 4 years, and I'm a completely different
Yeah.
person. And I kind of
Mm.
I say to people, just because I've been doing that doesn't mean every meditation practice I'm leaving my body and having these great, amazing experiences.
Mm.
Sometimes I'm still going, quiet mind, quiet mind. Other times I'm just
Totally.
floating and I don't even know that my body exists. But it's just depending on the day, the energy. Like there's so much in it. It's just consistently showing up, though. That's the key, right?
Oh, totally. And it's one of those things you got to have some level of faith you're doing the right thing. Because some days you have really shitty sessions, and some days
Yeah.
you have fantastic sessions. Being like, I did the same thing. Like, why is
Yeah.
it so different?
Yeah.
Um, the other thing you'll find as well, and this is why we're focused a bit more on it now, is the older you get, the harder it gets.
Mm,
So on the last couple of courses, generally the only people that do the 45-day courses are like old retirees, because that's when in life you have time. Some
yes.
people in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. And you lose the neuroplasticity of the mind. So you
Mm,
actually can't, because the way when you meditate, you actually physically change the way the mind works and operates and it thinks. And
yep.
the older you get, the harder it is.
Yeah.
So that's why I think it's great you're doing it now, because now is the time when you can actually build that into the mind and kind of cement that in.
Yep.
Because if you wait too long, you'll just find it harder. And that's why you find people in their 60s that start it for the first time, they just can't progress as much. It'd
Yeah.
be like, I don't know, if you started to learn tennis for the first time when you're 60, like you just kind
Yeah.
of missed it.
Tennis is exactly what popped in my head, and I love those synergies. They just blow
Mm,
my mind. Um,
totally.
so
Mm.
look, if people want to reach out and learn more about Opal, how can they do that? Are there any resources that they can get information on, either just learning about the systems, the AI
Mhm.
tech, or the investing? What's the best way for them to go about that?
Totally. So the main product that we have under Opal is TrialKey, so TRIALKEY.ai. It's still free. We haven't had a chance to build a paywall yet. So you can log in, you can sign up, you can start using the platform
Yep.
and check it out. And my details are all there if you ever want to reach out as well.
Yeah, great. And I'll include everything obviously in the show notes if anyone does want to
Yeah.
reach out and have a
Yeah.
chat with you. But thank you. I know that you've got a lot on. I know you're great at time
Everyone
management as
does.
well. Yeah. So thank you. I know your time's valuable, and I
Absolute
really thank
pleasure.
you for spending time with me and having a chat today.
Lovely. Certainly enjoyed it.
Thanks for joining in and listening to this episode of Catching the Octopus podcast. It's been great having you here. And if you'd like to go and like and subscribe and maybe even leave a 5-star rating if you think it's worth it, I'd really appreciate it. I look forward to seeing you in